Let me tell you something about human beings that most people spend their entire lives refusing to admit. Everyone is disappointed. Every single person walking this earth is carrying around a private gallery of shattered dreams. Things they wanted to become, things they wanted to feel. A version of their life that never arrived. Youth is when the fantasy lives at full volume. Then reality turns down the dial. Year by year. Compromise by compromise. Until one day you look up and realize the person you are is a pale, diminished version of the person you once believed you could be. That gap between who you are and who you dreamed you'd become is where the ideal lover lives. And anyone who truly understands this has access to one of the most potent forces in all of human psychology. The world gives you seducers who appeal to the body. They're common, they're everywhere, and they're forgettable. Then there are the rare ones. The ones who appeal to something deeper. Something you didn't even know was still alive inside you. These are the ideal lovers. And what they understand, what makes them unlike anyone else, is devastatingly simple. They know you have a fantasy, and they make themselves the living embodiment of it. No one has ever demonstrated this more completely than Giacomo Casanova. One evening around 1760 at the opera in Cologne, a beautiful young woman sat beside her husband. The husband was a burgomaster, a middle-aged man, perfectly adequate, thoroughly dull. Through her opera glasses, she noticed a stranger in a stunning outfit. He was looking back. After the opera, he introduced himself. He kissed her hand. She mentioned she was going to a ball the following night. He replied, "If I might dare to hope, madame, that you will dance only with me." Do you see what just happened there? He didn't say he was rich or powerful or interesting. He said, "You. Only you." A few days later, he dined at her house. After the husband retired, she showed him around. She pointed out a chapel visible from her boudoir window. The next day, without being asked, without a word, Casanova appeared at that chapel to attend Mass. That evening at the theater, he mentioned casually that he had noticed a door in the chapel that must lead to her bedroom. She laughed. She pretended to be surprised. And almost without thinking, she whispered that she would visit him there after everyone had gone to bed. He hid in that chapel's tiny confessional. All day, all night, there were rats. He had nothing to lie upon. When she finally came, late in the darkness, he did not complain once. Now understand what Casanova was doing here. This woman was bored. She was the wife of an amiable, dull man in a predictable life. What was missing in her world was adventure, romance, the feeling of being so desired that a man would wait in a rat-infested confessional box for hours just to be near her. Casanova didn't show her his resume. He didn't list his qualities or achievements. He studied her. He found the precise fantasy that lay dormant inside her particular life, and he became it. That's the method. And it's pure genius. Sometime later in London, a young Portuguese noblewoman named Miss Pauline answered an ad in a local newspaper. A gentleman was looking for a lady lodger to rent a part of his house. She had come to England by eloping with a lover who had since been forced to return home. She was alone. She had little money. She was depressed by her circumstances. She had been raised as a lady, and London was treating her like anything but. The gentleman placing the ad turned out to be Casanova. The room was lovely. The rent was low. He asked only for occasional companionship. They played chess, they went riding. They discussed literature. He was well-bred, polite, generous. A serious and high-minded woman, she came to depend on their friendship. Here at last was a man she could talk to for hours. Then, one day, Casanova seemed changed, upset, excited. He confessed that he was in love with her. She was going back to Portugal soon, to rejoin her lover, and this was not what she wanted to hear. She told him he should go riding to calm down. That evening, she received news. He had fallen from his horse. Feeling responsible, she rushed to him, found him in bed, and fell into his arms. They became lovers that night. And when the time came for her to leave for Portugal, he did not try to stop her. He comforted her, reasoned with her, told her they had offered each other the perfect temporary antidote to loneliness, that they would be friends for life. Do you see the difference between what Casanova did with this woman compared to the Cologne burgomaster's wife? For one, he became adventure, risk, the man who would suffer anything to be with her. For the other, he became friendship, refinement, intellectual companionship. A man of breeding who treated her like the lady she believed herself to be. He read each woman and became what she lacked. Not what he wanted to give, what she needed to receive. That is an entirely different orientation than most men carry into any interaction with a woman. Most men are thinking about themselves. Casanova was thinking entirely about her. In Spain, a young woman named Ignazia was leaving church after confession. Casanova approached. Walking her home, he invited her to a ball. He had a passion, he said, for the fandango. He was so different from anyone in her town. She desperately wanted to go. Her parents were against it. She persuaded her mother to chaperone. After an unforgettable evening of dancing, Casanova confessed he was madly in love with her. She replied very sadly that she already had a fiancé. He did not force the issue. Over the next few days, he took her to more dances, to the bullfights. On one occasion, he introduced her to a friend of his, a duchess, who flirted with him brazenly in front of Ignazia. Ignazia was terribly jealous, and now she was desperately in love with him. But her sense of duty and her faith forbade such thoughts. Finally, after days of torment, she came to him and took his hand. Her confessor, she said, had tried to make her promise never to be alone with him again. She could not make that promise. He had refused her absolution. It was the first time in her life such a thing had happened. I have put myself in God's hands, she told him. I have made up my mind to do all you wish. My fancy for you is, after all, only a passing madness. What was missing in Ignazia's life was not adventure or intellectual friendship. Her life was too comfortable, too pious, too easy. What she lacked, what she secretly craved, was suffering, torment, something real to confess. Casanova gave her exactly that. He found the wound and pressed it precisely. 3 women, 3 entirely different fantasies. One man who had the patience and the perception to identify each one and then become it. That is the ideal lover. Not a fixed personality. An artist, a shapeshifter, a portrait painter who makes every subject look like the version of themselves they always wanted to be. Now let's talk about Madame de Pompadour. Because if Casanova is the greatest practitioner of this art in the erotic domain, Pompadour is its greatest practitioner in the domain of power. In 1730, when Jean Poisson was 9 years old, a fortune teller predicted she would one day become the mistress of King Louis XV. This was considered an absurd prediction. Jean was middle class. The king's mistress was always chosen from the nobility. Her father was a notorious rake. Her mother had been a courtesan. None of this deterred her. Not for a single day. She was educated to become remarkable. Singing, clavichord, writing, acting, dancing, literature, history, the art of conversation. She was beautiful. She had a charm and grace that set her apart from everyone around her. By 1741, she had married into the lower nobility and opened one of the most celebrated literary salons in Paris. Every great writer and philosopher of the era frequented it. Voltaire became a lifelong friend, but she never forgot the fortune teller's prediction. One of her husband's country estates bordered on the king's favorite hunting grounds. She found ways to cross his path, always while wearing something elegant, something fetching, something slightly arresting. Soon the king was sending her gifts of game. When the king's official mistress died in 1744, every court beauty vied for the position. But Louis began spending more and more time with this middle-class woman. To the astonishment of all of Versailles, he made her his official mistress, ennobling her as the Marquise de Pompadour. The courtiers reassured themselves it wouldn't last. The king was notorious for novelty. A new woman would entrance him. He'd grow bored. He always did. They had no idea what they were dealing with. As time went by, the king found himself visiting his mistress more and more often. As he ascended the hidden staircase that led from his quarters to hers, he could feel the anticipation turn his head before he even arrived. The room was always warm, filled with delightful scents. She always wore a different costume. Elegant, surprising. She loved beautiful objects, fine porcelain, Chinese fans, golden flower pots, and every visit brought something new, something enchanting to discover. Her manner was always lighthearted. Never defensive, never resentful. Everything for pleasure. He had never been able to truly talk with a woman before. Not like this. She could discourse skillfully on any subject. Her voice was a pleasure to hear. If the conversation waned, she would move to the piano, play a tune, sing beautifully. If ever he seemed bored or sad, she would propose some project. The building of a new country house. He would have to advise on the design, the gardens, the decor. She gave him things to care about. She built a private theater at Versailles, put on weekly performances under her direction, and always played the female lead herself, because she was one of the finest amateur actresses in France. And here is what happened to a king who had previously cared only for hunting and gambling. He became a patron of the arts, a champion of philosophy and literature, a man who stamped an entire era with an aesthetic vision that history still calls Louis Quinze, a style that rivals his illustrious predecessor, Louis XIV. Year after year went by without Louis tiring of her. He made her a duchess. Her influence extended from culture deep into politics. For 20 years, Madame de Pompadour ruled both the court and the king's heart. Now understand what she understood. Louis XV had a powerful inferiority complex. He was the successor to the most formidable king in French history. He had been educated and trained for greatness, but who could follow that act? He had eventually abandoned the attempt and devoted himself to physical pleasures. The people around him knew they could manipulate him by appealing to his basest instincts. And so they did. Over and over, Pompadour saw something different. Inside Louis XV, she recognized a great man who had given up on himself. She did not appeal to his basest instincts. She reflected back to him something he had stopped believing was there. His obsession with young women wasn't about carnality. It was about hunger, a hunger for something more lasting than mere beauty, a hunger for meaning. She cured his boredom by making his world constantly surprising, constantly new. Once she had accustomed him to refined pleasures, she appealed to the crushed ideals within him. She held up a mirror and let him glimpse the man he could have been, the man he still could be. His previous mistresses had tickled his senses. Pompadour reached something deeper. She made him feel greatness in himself. You cannot replace that. You cannot compete with that. The other mistresses could be replaced in a night. There would never be another Pompadour. Here is the principle, and it applies to every human being you will ever meet. Most people believe themselves to be inwardly greater than they outwardly appear to the world. They are full of unrealized ideals. They could be artists, thinkers, leaders, spiritual figures. But the world has crushed them, denied them, worn them down. And all of that buried potential sits there quietly, waiting. It is the key to their seduction, and to keeping them seduced over time. Appeal only to someone's physical side, and they will eventually resent you. You've confirmed what they fear most, that they are nothing more than a body. But appeal to their higher self, to something lofty and beautiful inside them that the world has failed to acknowledge, and they will follow you anywhere. Make them feel elevated, lofty, seen, and your power over them will be without limit. Now let me take this further, because this principle doesn't stop at the bedroom door. In the 18th century, the French statesman Talleyrand essentially played the role of the ideal lover with Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's ideal, both in a cabinet minister and in a friend, was a man who was aristocratic, smooth, elegant with the ladies. Everything, in other words, that Napoleon himself was not. In 1798, when Talleyrand was French foreign minister, he hosted a lavish party in Napoleon's honor after the general's dazzling military victories in Italy. Napoleon remembered this party as the best he ever attended, right up to the day he died. What made it unforgettable wasn't the food or the entertainment. It was a subtle message Talleyrand had woven into the evening itself. Roman busts placed strategically around the house. Conversations steered toward the revival of the imperial glories of ancient Rome. A glint awakened in Napoleon's eye. A few years later, Napoleon gave himself the title of emperor. Talleyrand had simply held up a mirror to a man's secret ideal. He let Napoleon glimpse the possibility of becoming what he most deeply wanted to be. That is the ideal lover operating in the arena of power. And it made Talleyrand one of the most influential political figures in French history. John F. Kennedy did the same thing on the largest scale imaginable, an entire nation. By the late 1950s, America had grown comfortable and complacent. The pioneer spirit had been buried under prosperity and conformity. Something essential had gone quiet. Kennedy called it back: the new frontier, the space race, the Peace Corps. He didn't just run for president, he appealed to America's buried ideal of itself. He reminded a nation of what it had once believed it was capable of, what it had stopped believing. People did not merely vote for Kennedy. They fell in love with him, with the image of what America could be when it remembered itself. That is the mass-scale application of the ideal lover. You find the dream that has gone dormant, you name it, You embody it, and people follow you as if you are showing them the way home. Now, what does it actually take to do this? The key is observation. Not the kind of observation that catalogs surface facts. Deeper than that, ignore what people say they want. Focus on the tone of their voice. The blush in a moment of unexpected candor. The look in their eye when they mention something they long ago gave up on. The contradiction between what they claim and what they unconsciously reveal. The ideal is almost always expressed in contradiction. The king who hunts and chases young girls is actually starving for meaning. The woman who claims she wants only kindness and stability is often most drawn to the man who makes her a little afraid. The man who says he doesn't need anyone is often the most desperately hungry for someone who truly sees him. Read the contradiction and step into the space it creates. There are historical archetypes that function as templates, and it is worth knowing them. The chivalric knight, the man of absolute devotion, who will not let warfare, money, or his own interests intrude into the fantasy of courtship, who will undertake dangerous pilgrimages, suffer terrible trials, sacrifice comfort and safety, not because the woman is perfect, but because his devotion itself is the point. This archetype has limitless power over women because people who put another's interests genuinely above their own are genuinely rare. The intense focused attention of such a man is immensely appealing to the vanity of any woman fortunate enough to attract it. Rudolph Valentino was the embodiment of this archetype for the 1920s. Everything he did, the gifts, the flowers, the dancing, the careful, reverent way he took a woman's hand, communicated scrupulous attention to her. Courtship as an aesthetic experience. Men hated him because their women suddenly expected the same. Nothing is more seductive than patient attentiveness, because people like that are so rare. For men, the corresponding archetype is the woman who combines sensuality with an air of spirituality or innocence. Think of the great courtesans of the Italian Renaissance. They were prostitutes, but they disguised that social role behind reputations as poets and philosophers. They went to church. Their homes were pleasure palaces lined with books, volumes of Petrarch and Dante, shelves of art. The fantasy they offered was the combination of the high and the low, sensuality and intellect, physical pleasure and spiritual elevation, all in the same encounter. That ambiguity, that blending of apparent contradictions, creates an almost irresistible seductive pull. It implies a range of pleasures so complete that the man cannot imagine finding them gathered in one place anywhere else. There is a danger in all of this, and it must be named plainly. The ideal lover is creating a fantasy, and fantasies require maintenance. The moment reality intrudes too sharply, the moment the portrait painter shows up as an ordinary, flawed, self-interested human being, the spell can break. Casanova understood this instinctively. He typically found a way to end the relationship before the woman could discover he was not what she had imagined. He would find an excuse to leave town. Better still, he would choose a woman who was herself already leaving, because the awareness that the affair was brief made his idealization all the more intense. She never had time to see through it. Distance is often the solution, because reality and long intimate exposure have a way of dulling a person's perfection. Madame de Pompadour managed this in a different way entirely. She did not maintain an illusion. She genuinely became someone extraordinary. She did not fake her skills and talents. She had them. She did not pretend to understand art and philosophy. She truly did. The mirror she held up to Louis was polished with real competence and real care. That is the more durable version of this power. Not the illusion of the ideal, but the genuine cultivation of qualities that allow you to embody what another person needs. Both approaches exist. The first requires artistry and careful management. The second requires years of relentless self-development. The choice between them says something about who you are. Here is the final thing to understand. Never has there been a better moment than now to play the ideal lover. The modern world is thick with people who appeal only to the physical, who are too self-absorbed and impatient to truly see another person, who treat every interaction as a transaction in which they are the only customer. To be an oasis in that desert is to be extraordinary, and extraordinary is rare, and rare is irresistible. You are surrounded by people carrying dreams they have stopped talking about, ideals they have stopped chasing, versions of themselves they have quietly put away. Find those hidden things, reflect them back, Make the person standing in front of you feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that the life they gave up on is not entirely out of reach. Do that, and you will never have to chase anyone again. They will come to you.